Alright everybody, for today's video, I'm going to be once again stirring the pot and seeing how much trouble I can get into, as our topic is going to be how mainstream sites are failing the independent game scene. As we've talked about many times over, the last decade could really be described as the rise of the independent scene. This is when we saw kind of the acceptance and just overall growth and credibility of independent developers stepping forward, with many games going on to be better than AAA titles and earning a lot of awards and allocates. But with that said though, the coverage when it comes to the independent space still seems to be woefully behind, and it's causing, I think, some problems when it comes to being an indie dev in the first place. So close your eyes for a second and picture your favorite mainstream site, and chances are I'm going to be talking about them. And I had various versions of this video planned on my head in terms of just how angry I wanted to get, just how many bridges that I want to burn. But ultimately, I'm going to try and keep things relatively neutral or diplomatic, but we'll see what happens. As we've talked about, when we look at kind of mainstream coverage of the independent scene, it is definitely troublesome in terms of what games they cover and how their coverage is approached. And when we look at the games that make it to the various sites, they fall into three categories. You have the, oh my god, this game is horrible and controversial and you should hate it and blah blah blah, which I'm going to probably bet money on this. I'm going to assume that Polygon is most likely going to cover that game's subverse, whether it turns out good, bad, or whatever. The second category are the clickbait worthy, meme games, where people can make adorable videos about them, as we saw with Untitled Goose Game, Stop Talking Everybody Explodes, and there are many other examples of this. And then the third kind are the gimmies. These are the games that have already achieved massive renown, and at this point getting onto a major site really doesn't do much for the coverage. It's kind of as we've talked about, it's the feather in the cap. It's the proof the game has succeeded, not the reason why it succeeded. So this would be games like Darkest Dungeon, Slay the Spire, Dead Cells, Disco Elysium, Celeste. Pick any major indie game that won an award, and that falls into this category. And it's important to know that we are not downvoting or decrying any indie games in this video. This is not about the games, this is about the coverage that is being given out. And regardless of what kind of game gets covered, the same trend always happens. Once they've covered that game, it disappears from that site within probably 24 to 40 hours of that piece. And it will only be called up again if that game gets into trouble or there's some massive news piece or outcry over it. And this is not how you want to handle indie coverage. And it presents some very big issues when it comes to kind of showing off what the independent market is, and as we said, what it means to succeed. Because for every indie game that gets mentioned on IGN, Kotaku, Destructoid, Escapist, whatever, there are probably several hundred, or at this point maybe even several thousand games that are not getting any coverage whatsoever. And I'm sure some of you are going to report that a lot of indie games don't deserve that coverage. If you watch our live shows every week, we've looked at a lot of the bottom of the barrel kind of games. But there are plenty of games that fall into the flawed gem category, or doing something different or unique that should at least deserve some measure of discourse. And those games are not getting covered at all. And the problem is that when we do see these games get covered by the mainstream, it falls into this kind of coverage. That, oh my god, I have discovered this amazing and strange game that you've never heard of, and I'm the first one to do this coverage on it. And by the way, I just did more YouTuber reaction faces in the last 5 seconds than I've done probably in the last 3 years. But it's the same kind of discourse out of the AAA market, or I'm sorry, out of major sites. That they view the indie games that do pop up as this strange and mysterious anomaly, and how could a game this good come from the independent space? And I know what you're thinking right now, or actually I know probably you're thinking of two different thoughts. The first is that this is me just going after major sites because I want to get coverage. And as I've said before, being a game journalist has never been one of my goals when it comes to game wisdom. And as we've talked about, game journalism and actually talking about game design in the industry are two separate universes. And I've pitched pieces for places like Polygon, IGN, even PC Gamer, and never got the time of day, and I've never looked back at them. The other point, of course, is that these sites are very busy. They're putting out constant news pieces and reviews and interviews every day, and surely they don't have the time to cover every indie game. And like I said, we're not talking about every indie game, and I have to call at least a little bit of BS on that. If I can cover anywhere from 15 to 30 indie games a month, then sites that have time for top 10 lists, TV show fan theories, miscellaneous lists, or again the adorkable videos can surely spend a few minutes each day covering at least one or two indie games. And like I've said, when the coverage does come for the independent space, it comes in a sense too late for those games to matter. It's important to understand from a development and from a marketing point of view that when a game gets picked up by IGN or PewDiePie or Markiplier or covers your game, that's not the sign, or that's not the reason for the success. That's the symptom, or that's the cause, or what is the result of the marketing and success of that game. Again, Stardew Valley, Darkest Dungeon, Slay the Spire, whatever, didn't become popular and famous because major sites and YouTubers cover them. They became successful out of their own marketing and the work that went into it, and the result was that extra coverage. And what we end up seeing happening is that the kind of coverage that comes out of the mainstream sites is very harmful to what it means to make an independent game, as well as, again, giving false impressions about what it means to succeed, as well as, in a sense, gatekeeping, in a manner of speaking. And we're going to talk about more of these harmful effects next, but first, a quick shout out to our current Game Wisdom supporters and sponsors. And now for a quick shout out to our current Game Wisdom supporters and sponsors. Going forward, all Patreon supporters will get early access to our videos. And if you'd like to continue this discussion on game design, be sure to check out our Discord channel, link down below. If you're looking for more wisdom about game design, be sure to check out my latest offering of books, 20 Essential Games to Study, aimed for first-time developers and students looking for some inspiration for their upcoming games, and Game Design Deep Dive Platformers if you're interested in anything regarding 2D and 3D platforming design. They're both available in print, digital, and wherever books are being sold. Despite just how far the independent space has come in the past 10 years, the coverage of these games by mainstream sites still feels behind. And as I said at the end of the last part, this is not good when it comes to sustaining and growing a healthy market. As we have spoken to many developers and had constant chats about, it is very hard to make a living in the game industry, let alone making it as an indie dev. And like we've said, for every game that succeeds, there are easily hundreds of them that don't. And sometimes all it takes is that lucky break of having your game being recognized by somebody else and getting the word out. And there is a lot to unpack there. We could probably spend a good 30 minutes on that very sentence alone. But for a lot of developers, they look at major sites and YouTubers and people like that as kind of the last bastions or their saving grace to try and get their game some level of coverage. And the problem is that the mainstream sites just don't give those games the time of day. And if you're only focusing on the games that have already succeeded, it creates some very big problems when it comes to this conception of making an indie game. The first is very obvious. If you only look at the games that have already been successful, then you're not really giving fair coverage to the actual independent space. There are plenty of games out there that are amazing and interesting titles in their own right that could have been commercially successful given just the right amount of coverage, as we've talked about before with Vision Soft Reset. Hellsign here as our next example is a game that I am really looking forward to, that I have not seen all that much coverage out of mainstream sites. And again, if there was any coverage, it could have been maybe a 800-word blurb or even less than that, and then the game is never seen again, or that coverage disappears within 6 to 12 hours of going up on the site just due to how the news flow works. The other problem is that it creates a misconception about what the market is for the independent space. With AAA games, no matter what kind of game gets released, or if it's the umpteenth first-person shooter or open-world game, it's going to get big coverage on sites like IGN, Kotaku, and etc. For the independent space, however, only getting a fraction, or even less than a fraction, of the games being released paints an unrealistic picture about what games are succeeding. And one of the easiest traps you can fall into as a new indie developer is thinking that just because game A was successful, that if I copy that, then I'm going to succeed as well. And again, we have seen this with every major indie game that gets mainstream coverage. FTL, Darkest Dungeon, Untitled Goose Game, Celeste, you name it. How you can track again how many copycat games are released following those games getting major coverage. Sometimes those games do turn out well and different, but the majority of them always end up crashing and burning, while the titles that are legitimately different and unique never get any coverage because they never got to the point of being mass market or quote unquote, the hot topic or hot game for that time. And this is very dangerous and very damaging to the independent space. Because if you want those unique games to keep coming up and doing well, they need to get coverage for it. And it shouldn't be this hard for a site like IGN or Polygon, whatever, to dedicate, 1 to 2 videos a day or even just a week on whatever random indie games people are playing or whatever games are out there. This is why, for me, I try to purposely avoid talking about big name indie games because they don't need my help anymore. And yes, there are exceptions to this. I've played a lot of World of Horror on stream. But this is why I do the Indie Spotlight streams once a month. Because I don't think the majority of those games are going to get massive coverage otherwise. And if we want these games, and if we want this market, I should say, to succeed, then there needs to be a greater showing than just either A, the most controversial, or B, the games that are already successful. And I also want to give another major point to mainstream coverage, or I should say a downvote to them, for how they talk about early access games. If I see one more quote-unquote early access review of a game, I think I may have to scream or throw one of my cans of Dr. Brown out the window here. Because that's not how you present a game in early access as a review. And again, this misunderstanding of the independent space is not helping developers who are trying to rely on this coverage as a way to succeed. And I am sure that for the indie devs watching this right now, you are probably thinking to yourself, man, it would have been nice if IGN would have mentioned my game maybe just once on their site, or Destructoid, or Kotaku, or pick anybody else. And when we see them just not focusing on this, other than, again, the 3 points we mentioned earlier, it's painting an unrealistic picture for the consumer side as to what's in the independent space, as well as the developers who are trying to figure out, how do I market my game? And again, the whole idea of marketing games, that is another topic and a half. But it really frustrates me when I see legitimately great or unique indie games just don't get any coverage compared to ones that have already succeeded. And since I've already stuck the knife in, I might as well twist it. I pitched an article to IGN about Kaizo games and kind of the growth of the community to kind of shine a light on these great designs. And the person just not only completely snubbed me, but they never even got back to me to let me know after showing interest, whether or not they're going to say yes or no to that. And I'm fine with them not picking me if somebody else covers that topic. And I have seen nothing along those lines. And that's what makes me angry. That instead of covering unique and interesting titles, it's the same clickbait, fan theory pieces that are just, the topic of the day, and then it becomes, throw away the next. And if we want the independent space, or just the gaming market as a whole, to become healthier and more viable, then we need to get more coverage on games that aren't just paying the big bucks for front page coverage, or have already earned enough coverage that they are going to do really well. Now, at this point, normally I would say, tell me in the comments below, what's an independent game that you've played that could have done with more coverage? Because if I did that, I think everybody could name at least 10 to 30 games easily. But with all that said, if you are an indie dev watching this video right now, if you'd like me to take a look at your game in the future for a spotlight stream, please don't hesitate to get in touch, as again, I am always looking for new games to spotlight. Thank you so much for watching this video. Again, be sure to check out the Discord and Patreon link down below, and come back for daily discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Until next time, take care. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoy things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel link down below, where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.